I'm here with a dear friend, Tom Heggestad. We've known each other for many years, and I thought about doing an interview with him so he can tell us about his life and times and whatever else that comes up. So thank you, Tom, for the opportunity.
No problem.
We both met in connection with seeing Krishnamurti, the philosopher, educator, in the 80s. Can you please tell me how you first heard about him?
Well, like most people, I probably read a book, because my earliest reference, and this is what I use as the answer to that question, is some diary I wrote back in the late 70s. It was just one word, Krishnamurti, exclamation point. So obviously I was moved by something I had read, but like all people, many people, you put it down and move on to other things. And then it wasn't until the early 80s that I heard he still was alive. And I was living in the Southwest, New Mexico, and I learned he was giving talks in San Francisco. This would have been 83. And so I said, hey, let's go. So, I guess being young, I was probably, in my late 20s. I went to San Francisco, and I didn't know anybody there. I just went there with this address and found them, and then must have stayed somewhere. And, it was great. And then, of course, in the process of going to a K-talk, there's people around, and they ask you, oh, tell me your story, and who are you? And so eventually I got invited because there was the Ojai talks coming up right after. Come on down to Ojai. What's Ojai? Oh, okay, I'll come to Ojai. So I hadn't anything really going on.
Where were you living at? Oh, New Mexico, you said.
Yes, I was actually living at the Santa Fe Zen Center, which was started by Roshi Philip Kapleau, the 3 Pillars of Zen guy. And, I'd gotten into that. That was really my only so-called spiritual thing. My brother had actually sort of got me started. He was, shall we say, a bit more advanced in those matters than I was. But anyway, I really liked that and had a few experiences and was there to, help them build their center. And, I took off, went to Ojai, and one thing led to another. I got one of those round-the-world trip tickets, and from Ojai in 83 spring, I went to San in Switzerland, and then in Brockwood, and then to India. Here I was, this fairly sheltered kid. I hadn't gone anywhere except with my family on vacations. But there I was in India. Of course, not knowing anybody except these few contacts that I met. But everywhere I went, people were very friendly and received me and put me up and said, oh, here, this is where you go, this is what you do. And it was there, I guess, I met Dr. Pachire, who was Krishnamurti's doctor, and he sort of, well, it's a little too extreme to say he took me under his wing, but I kind of got to hang out with him. And he made this tour from Bombay up to Delhi, and then like this parabola down to Benares. And so that was the sort of spring winter of 83, 84. And I think at some point there was a Sri Lanka set of talks and a visit to Sri Lanka.
Wow.
I mean, I was going to these incredible places.
Wow.
I remember one trip, because there was, of course, always time in between the talks. We got to Benares, and there was a school there, Rajgat School, of course. And I made friends there. And they said, oh, they're going on this sort of holiday to Nainital, which is a big lake. So they said, come along.
Wow.
So I was
With the students or?
Yeah, students, teachers. But I just remember being on this little boat in the middle of Nainital with, maybe the others were floated ahead or they were back at camp or somewhere. And like, I just remembered, now here I am in the middle of this lake. I don't know where the hell I am. Nobody in the world that I know knows where I am. And there was something so delightful about that anonymity.
Right.
That, anyway. So eventually I found my way back to the U.S. And so then rather than just keep doing all the circuit from 84, 85, I would skip maybe the sonnet and then just stay in Ojai and help out, volunteer. Right. I remember cutting the grass. Then I got back to Brockwood, which was wonderful, as anyone who's visited there would know. And I wasn't a staff member, but they let me sit in at the meetings. I just remember this one sort of experience of, it's the talks time. It was busy. And here were these, 20, 25 staff members. And they had to organize everything. They had to solve all these problems. Mm-hmm. And probably, I'm projecting a bit, but, one of the big things Kay would do, just from me listening to the staff discussions, he would just hammer away at them, and so they must have carried some of that with them, because when I have this image of when a problem would be brought up over here, 3 more solutions would pop up over there, and this sense of, of course it's melodramatic, but of one mind at work.
Right.
It just was really palpable. Mm-hmm. And you even knew that some of these people didn't like each other at all, but they could just work together.
Right.
And they put on a great event, and I got to help out. I lived in the Sonnen tent at one point, helped put the tent up with Peter. He was this really strong, friendly Swiss guy. Mm-hmm. And they let me just sort of, quote, guard the tent. So I just put a sleeping bag on the platform. And then, during the day, you'd go out for these long, beautiful walks. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to kind of get all hot from walking, then find a nice ice-cold mountain stream and just go jump in that. But still, I was having the time of my life. Mm-hmm. And, of course, absorbing all this stuff from what Kay was saying. Right. I probably wrote some horrible letters to my mother, who was wondering what the hell her son, who they had worked so hard. My father had died by then. They'd worked so hard to, raise me and then put me through this good college. Right. And here he was traveling around the world, and what's it about? So I tried to, quote, explain, what Kay was about, and that was impossible to a, 50-some-year-old woman, but she knew I loved her, and I felt that. And so it didn't matter. It was just, I was probably just being a bit ornery. And my sisters, too. And anyway, my brother, he was still doing the Zen stuff, and he had learned carpentry. Mm-hmm. So he was actually going to go to cabinet making school. So anyway, at the very end, I went to the last talks in Benares. Everybody went south to Rishi Valley and Madras for those real last talks. And I went north. I figured at some point I'm going to have to end this, say goodbye. So I kind of went north, and they let me go to Uttarkashi, which is this retreat, right, which wasn't even officially open, but they said, oh, you can stay there. Okay. And I went there to say goodbye to Kay. And little did I know that he was just, 2 months from the end of his life. But I had a great time up there, just having days and days of quiet and walking. I met this Hindu sadhu who lived near the retreat, and we would have these great talks. But of course, being fairly naive, I ate some of the vegetables that were growing in the garden, and I got stomach something. And so they said, quick, you got to go home. Kay is coming back to Ojai, and he's not doing too well, so quick, go home. So I just said, okay. I changed my ticket, and I got back to Ojai, and they put me up in a little kitchen room at Arivahara. And, I wasn't involved in any of the, quote, last discussions, but, all these big shots, all these heavy hitters
Right. The
were
trustees.
around. Yeah, trustees from all the 3 foundations.
Right.
They were sweet to me. They would say hello. I was just probably some new kid on the block, but, you knew that they were going through, for them, a very rough time. They were losing this man who, and Mary Zimbalist was particularly kind to me. So Mary Zimbalist, Dr. Pachure, kind of became my surrogate mother and father,
Right.
if you'll forgive the term.
I know what you mean.
And then, they told me one day, well, last night he passed away. So, all right,
You move on.
I was still immersed in the teachings, and, I don't want to say it didn't affect me, but I wasn't as personally identified with Kay, and
Right.
it wasn't like I didn't feel anything, because I knew everybody was probably suffering a fair bit, but,
Right.
I was just so grateful, so overwhelmed with, not just the intellectual content, but these experiences. I was having these, amazing awareness, intention experiences. So at some point, everybody started to clear out and return to their home bases. And there was this guy there from Brockwood, Harsh Tanka,
Yep.
and he heard, oh, you know about computers? Well, I'm doing this project. So come on over there. So the project, of course, was to put all of Kay's books onto a computer database, the quote K-Text project.
Sure.
So I said, what the hell? Sure. So I went there. I got a ticket and visa, and Brockwood is just tremendous.
It's dream.
And now I was a staff member. I wasn't. They kept trying to get me to teach, but I, for some reason, didn't want to teach. I just wanted to have the space. And then I worked hard. I worked very hard, and we produced a really good product. And it still lasts. It lasts now. It's incarnated into the jkrishnamurti.org site.
Right.
But you just, at one point, they decided they wanted to keep me, so they sent me back here while they did the green card processing. And he shipped the big Kurzweil optical character recognition scanner. And I stayed in the upper flat, what we call the Bohm flat. And they just basically gave me a pile of Krishnamurti books. And I would slice off the binder, the whatever the edge, and
Scan them in.
scan them in.
OCR.
So literally, I've read every single word of all of Krishnamurti's books. As it comes across the screen,
Sure.
you have to check for errors real quick.
Right.
So I don't know what claim to fame that gives me.
Well, I've done the same. I didn't have to check it.
Yeah. But that was great. And then just organize. It's a huge organizational task to keep everything, clear. And then you break it up by chapters and so on, so on. So, then we finally got all that done, and then went back to Brockwood and brought the machine back, and the hard drive, which, of course, had all this precious material. It turned out to be quite small. The whole database is like 100 megabytes. It's nothing.
That's right. I have it on my laptop.
Yeah. But then, life at Brockwood is amazing life. And I got into that. One little other thing which sort of affected or changed my life is while I was still here, I met this young woman who had been planning to come to Ojai to hear Kay. She had read Kay and didn't know he was still alive, and heard he was alive and immediately came out. But he had died in February. So she was hoping to come to the, quote, Ojai 85 talks. But she got out here.
86, you mean?
Well, it would have been whatever after he died.
Right,
Yeah, so
86.
86. Correct, 86. That was Mary Delatorre, who's now my wife. But she became the Krishnamurti librarian here in
That's right.
Arivahara.
I remember.
And, you know, we started living together. We became very close. And then I basically had to go back to Brockwood and say goodbye to that whole life. And I came back here again to be with her. And so now you're here. What are you going to do here? You're an American. You're in Ojai. So they would have just put me to work on some old, administrative project. Not to be disrespectful, but Barchure had been very close to Kay, and he had taken really seriously the request that, the original, whatever he had said, at least the words, be preserved, which of course means archives. And while I was still at Brockwood at one point, helping Harsh with K-Tex, I sort of would sneak off and learn about archiving with Barchure. And he was a great teacher, and he would, push me and, what have you done today? What have you accomplished? So that when I came out to Ojai, I basically carried on that. And the culmination of that interest and that initiative, which, I lay at his feet, Barchure started us. There's a few of us. Is the archives building.
Right.
So all through the 90s, we raised the money, $1 million? I'd never raised money. And we designed it, and I was smart technically, but how to design a building. So I worked closely with the contractors and all the subcontractors. And you have to make sure that everything works together. And eventually it was built.
They worked together even though they didn't like each other. You were referring to Brockwood. At that point when Kay was alive. Do you think that he was kind of holding it together?
Oh, definitely.
Or the mindset or the culture which he was promoting in a way, or that he was.
Yes.
Calls for that, because I notice in my work environment.
That's a better way of putting it, yes.
Because when you're in the present, you're not carrying images, even though if you had a hard time with somebody before, and they present a new idea, you go at it and you have a dialogue about it and so on.
And when I say holds it together or he hammered at them, that implies that he was using the force of his personality, which, of course, for some of these guys, maybe that's what it took. But no, I think you put it much better, that he literally created an atmosphere in which, which is hard to push your way over somebody else's.
Yes, okay. But also, I think also holding it together might have been a part of it too. Because if you look at other teachers in history, what happens after a great teacher dies, there's usually a lot of separation and so on. So in a way, when they're alive, they're holding it together. So this is a little bit of a concern around this subject.
Well, so one way I've looked at it in the past is that, generally somebody who's so, shall we say, magnetic will attract certain aspects of the human mind, right? And Kay's reach or Kay's dynamism extended so far that he just pulled in a very wide swath of humanity, of human consciousness. And so you didn't just have this uniformity of, belief system or mindset approaches. You had a real diversity, it seemed to me. And naturally, friction, fragmentation could ensue from that, but I think he went deep, and like anything, you can't solve a problem at its level. And so he would just try to really, whenever you give these talks, he'd be talking to the staff members, the people there, just like in the crowd. He'd be talking to them, but he'd be also like speaking to human consciousness. Is that fair? I mean, all these guys sitting in the crowd or sitting in the staff discussion, they're just people too, but in a way, and to the extent that they would allow themselves to take it on, they were just representatives of humanity. And he reached that, he spoke to that, and that somehow, I think, responded.
Yeah, and if they're living the teachings, let's say, which teachings is not a doctrine. Basically, to me, what that word living the teaching means, taking on some of the challenges. I look at case teachings as a set of pointers and challenges.
Correct.
So if somebody's done, and this could be K, it could be anybody. There's been many people in my life who come and throw a challenge or say, "There's a beautiful flower, you can go check it out." You know, and so when you do that, then it's firsthand. And part of this great set of challenges and pointers is all of these things around self-knowledge, learning about your own conditioning, being free from it, and so on. So in that way, and also ending this divisive thought.
Right. I mean, related to that, I was just thinking, in terms of some kind of self-sustaining process, everybody knows what it feels like to be in conflict with somebody else,
Right.
and how bad that feels. But you try it the other way. You just try to, all right, yeah, I know I could keep arguing with you, but let's just put it aside. And what that feels like, it's not like you're going to go embrace each other, but it's just something flows.
Right.
And that's lovely when that happens.
And at least you're not giving continuity to
exactly
to divisive thinking.
To that familiar divisive thinking, right?
Right.
Something new.
Yeah. Another thing that came to my mind as I was listening to you, you mentioned about your mother and her thinking, what is my son up to?
Right.
Now, let's talk about this a little bit, because I personally know people who've gone into cults.
Yes.
And their parents are very worried, and they should be worried.
Yes.
Because they get into these blind beliefs, dogmas, and so on. But none of that existed around what you were doing. From what I know you as a person and what I know this thing which you were interested in. So I think this is important to highlight, because you were not caught in a cult. You were not believing in things which were not true.
I mean, I had been looking into this stuff. I mean, you know, here I was, and I had been raised in very good schools, and I was very smart, obviously, academically, intellectually, whatever. But something in me was pretty aware that, you know, there was some poverty there, whether it was just emotionally or certainly you could say spiritually, that I just hadn't explored some things. And so, all right, when you start to explore some things, Christianity, which I'd been raised in, no thanks. Nothing there. No offense.
It's your opinion.
Yes. But I mean, like, I looked for something, and anyway, and so eventually it turned to Buddhism. And, you know, there's all kinds of different Buddhist things. And so I was looking for something that was simple, that didn't have a whole lot of, you know, like piles of words associated with it. And Zen seemed to fit that bill. And the fact that my brother, who I had a strong affinity for, had gotten into it, and he'd ever tried, it's called Zazen, the Zen meditation. Oh, it's just so nice. It just feels so good. And, you know, if you've ever had any of those, well, I don't know what to call them, awakening experiences, but these little glimpses of the emptiness that sort of is in the midst of everything. I don't know. It's silly.
No, but I know what you mean.
So we have these week-long sessions where, you know, it's very structured, and, you know, these guys do have their traditions, and not to speak like too highly of them, but it worked for me. And so I brought whatever I had gotten from there to K. So I was already like on the fringes, you know. I wasn't so kind of guru, yogi pursuer. I was into this side of the, quote, religious pursuits that was hard work, you know. And so anyway, how I could show my mother or my sisters, again, if my father was around, it might have been a different story, but he had passed on.
My father and I brought my father here, and at first they were also a little bit wondering, what is this about? But then they heard from scholars in Iran, Rumi scholars, who said, after we read Krishnamurti, we could understand parts of Rumi that we couldn't understand before. And we grew up with these ideas from childhood, you know, so all of this was not so strange to them. Nevertheless, when I started college, I also felt a thirst. I was thirsty for wisdom, let's say.
Yes.
And the funny thing is, I could smell the water. It was like, you know, a thirsty horse smelling of water. It was like this. I knew that pool of wisdom was somewhere. And that was the process of getting educated in college. That was all part of drinking. Because you drink, I drank, I studied Western philosophers and Eastern philosophers and all of these things. And then I also studied K, and he put everything in a very, in the right light in a way. Like in philosophy school, even my professor, who was a renowned author, he had trouble understanding Hegel, and he was saying, Reza, I'm envious, because you're getting these parts of Hegel which I'm having a hard time with. And I said, well, maybe if you read some Christian Mary, it helps. Anyway.
It's nicely put. You know, they were pretty tightly wound, you know, the people who were close to Kay.
Right.
So you couldn't. I had one lunch with him, and he shook my hand once after the talks.
Right.
And he recognized me. He said, "Sir, you've listened enough. Go away." So, you know.
I had a very similar story, actually. Maybe more than once I shook hands with him, but anyway, my story is not the subject here. Let's talk about that a little bit, about the inside circle. Mary Lichen said that K was like the sun, and if you were too close to like being too close to the sun, you burn. So she was saying some of the people who were too close to him didn't get his message, probably because they were too caught in that magnetism you talked about, which is easy to do. And near the end of his life, he said that nobody got it, and so this has been a subject of long discussion. But some of the people that I talked to, some of those heavy hitters, to use your words, some of them, they said he was talking about us, not the entire humanity, you know.
Right.
So I wrote a couple articles called "The Myth of Nobody Got It," because this is also a very popular excuse to not study.
Quite.
If nobody got it, then
what's the point?
What's the point? And add to it what happened on the gathering here, or add to that, it's difficult. So nobody got it. It's difficult, and it's all or none. You either get the whole thing or none of it. So these are all myths, as far as I'm concerned. There's no truth to them, because it affected your life, didn't it? It affected my life. It affected somebody else I was speaking to. So, anyway, your daughter. You have two lovely daughters.
Yes.
Who are both students at the Oak Grove School.
Yes.
How does it feel to be a parent of kids who are in Oak Grove? Tell us a little bit about your experience with Oak Grove.
This is my sort of second round in the K circles. I mean, I went and I was just a student, and then I came here and I was a staff member both at Brockwood and at KFA. And then I went away for a few years after the archives building was built, so I kind of took a break. And in that interim, my wife and I, we tried to have kids the regular way. It didn't work, so we adopted. And then lived in Maine, where we had a cottage. And
I remember. How long were you in Maine for?
Let's see.
A couple of years or something.
Probably 5-6 years.
Wow.
We had different places, but the point was, it became quickly apparent that our ideas of quote homeschooling, because where we were living was beautiful, but it was one of the poorest parts of Maine, very rural, and this public schools weren't that great, and you know, a lot of our friends up there were trying to do homeschooling, and we realized we didn't have the energy to keep up with these two little guys. They were just, you know, too full of it. So anyway, these three balls collided. One, my boss, Mark Lee, said I could have my job back. This was in 2006 or 2005, late. Second, a house opened up. It's hard to get a place to live in Ojai, but a house opened up in Taormina, so we just took it sight unseen. And then friends sublet it until we got there finally, late summer 2006. And third, they said, yeah, let them come to, the girls can come to Oak Grove. So they started in August, September of 2006 in kindergarten and first grade. And so I came back as a staff member, but also as a parent, which is, you know, really a very unique perspective. I mean, to be a parent by itself is an outrageous perspective. I recommend it to anyone, obviously, who hasn't tried it. And I know a lot of friends in the K circles who, you know, they love kids, but they wouldn't touch it. But
I'm one of them.
I'm so grateful. it's been horribly hard work, but anyway, our daughters are the sweetest things. So, obviously our whole circle's changed, so we have a lot of parents, mostly from, kids in my daughter's classrooms who are our friends, and you have shared common needs, common problems to solve, play dates, doing stuff together. How do you handle this? How do you handle that? So that's been great. But, in the meantime, I would kind of head off to work every day and do whatever I could do to help Krishnamurti's stuff. And I used to have an office at the school. And so every day at lunch, it was horrible to work there because you have these outrageous smells wafting up from the kitchen into your office. But I would try to go out and just, sit with my daughters and, just walk around and visit some of the kids. And, it's a generalization, but all the kids just seem so happy. And if I have to, our kids, they just love to go to school. All aspects, yes, they'd sometimes rather not do all the homework, but other times they're like doing the homework and they'll get up the next morning and they'll finish their homework. And, what kid does that? The kids are usually burned out by third grade. And
which grade are they in?
so now they've just finished 6th and 7th grade. In a few weeks, they'll be true teenagers, 13 and 14. And we'll have to enter all that stuff. We're getting a taste of, the hormone rush. But they're beautiful girls, and they're very intelligent, very creative. They've obviously been perhaps a lot, affected by the early institutionalization. But we've learned a lot about that.
You mean adaptation and things?
Yeah, where they had to live in an institution.
Oh, I see.
That's a whole saga, and we could talk for a long time on that. But my wife, she's a clinical social worker. She already has a real sensitivity to that domain, and so she's been fabulous. Our kids are so lucky. We're all lucky to have her. She's had to work so hard to keep giving out that, no matter what behaviors they put out, to just
she's an angel. I've seen her.
Yeah, that unconditional
especially,
love.
Around difficult situations. She just diffuses it like, truly.
Well,
like an angel.
she would tell you as much as anybody that it's not always possible.
Right.
Especially when somebody's hammering on you. Mama, do this. Mama, do that. Rub my feet. Go get this.
My sister has 2 kids. I have a lot of friends who have kids, little kids. And the consensus is that it's mission impossible. Enough said. But, my parents did it. Your parents did it. But times were also different back then. The environment was different. You live in Ohio, which is a small place. And it helps a little bit, but...
Yeah, no, it's different than what I grew up with. We had a big yard in our backyard, and friends were always around. We'd be playing after dinner, and then they would say, come on in. And, it'd be like time for bedtime. But, here, you don't do anything without arranging it all. And you have to drive somebody somewhere.
Yeah, but little bits. In Los Angeles, you drive long distances.
Right.
And there's no grandma like there was back home.
Oh, right. It'd be great to have
or aunts and cousins.
Family around, but my sisters, they're very supportive, but, San Francisco and Pennsylvania, they're still away. My mom's, sorry, that's enough. But my mom is, very, very supportive. But, she's in her 90s. She's in a nursing home. Mary's family outside of Philly, where we lived. And my dad was a doctor, and so she was a nurse. And anyway, I had a great childhood. And I never really had anything that was, quote, too hard for me. Not that I breezed through, but I sort of breezed through everything until we started to do the parenting, and then my health situation arose. I have a very rare type of cancer. It's of the class of sarcoma, soft tissue sarcoma, which is like 1% of cancers. It's not like the big breast and prostate and other ones. And there's 50 different subclasses of sarcoma. Mine is hemangioparasitoma, which doesn't really help much. The whole point is that since it's so rare, it's not really studied. So the tricks that the oncologist uses is try to throw something at it that looked like it might help because it helped for somebody who had these similarities in their cancer. So anyway, I've managed to keep going and managed to deal with the side effects and the surgeries. And yeah, I guess I'm a very good patient. I mean, if my dad was a doctor, I could have been, but my side of the medical profession has been on the receiving side, and I'm really into it. I love this. I love to be supportive however I can, and you know, the hospitals, the doctors, the nurses.
Anyway, I wish you, I mean,
Yes.
given your attitude, I think you're going to live a long, long time.
Well,
And maybe science will even take care of it, or you find another solution. What we do know is that healing is absolutely real. We know the universe has healing energies. I've been healed myself. My knee, I had a problem with my knee for a long time. And one of our friends whom you know just touched it. I said, please, you live a religious life, not believing in some esoteric things, but just the way you live. You're a correct man, you're a good man, you do a lot of exercises and so on, are very healthy. Just touch my knee. So he put his hand on my knee. That day I went 5 train stations later, I felt this thing shoot out of my knee, go to my toe and get out. I'm a scientist, I'm not imagining things. This was a real experience. Ever since then the knee was fine. You know?
that's so great.
Krishnamurti healed, I know a girl, you might know her too, who had leukemia. Did you know that? He healed her, and the funny thing is, properties exist in the universe.
But I'm saying that even if I am on death's door, I still want to be, quote, living a good life, you know? And each day, I mean, you could be all worried and anxious, or you could be mean and unkind, but I mean, you know, life is such a gift now, and I'm grateful that I can still be here. I wish I had more time with my family, and maybe I will.
Maybe you will.
And I'll do whatever I can, you know, to help. But anyway.
But you live every day fully.
Try to live fully.
Yeah, but we're all in the same boat, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's...
Quite. I mean, everybody's got a death sentence, right?
Right, exactly. And nobody knows how close it is.
That's right.
So we all live in the yellow submarine.
Right.
Now, coming back to Kay about studying of his books. So you read a lot of his text. You
Yes.
applied it in your daily life.
Yeah.
Obviously, because without application, it's not just a theoretical discipline, it's an
Right.
applied
No.
field. Did you find it difficult? I mean, did you study in university?
I did. I went to a very good university, MIT, and I studied, you know, math, engineering,
Okay.
not really philosophy or religious stuff.
Yeah, but all
But
the
my brain
sciences
had
are-
been, you know, conditioned so that I don't want to say it wasn't difficult to understand K, but it wasn't difficult
It
to
wasn't
understand
difficult.
K.
I don't think so. It's not more difficult than physics or math. And also math and physics and all of those sciences are rooted in philosophy anyway.
Right.
So it's the mindset.
Well, there's a degree of logical, you know, this step,
Right,
in physics and math, especially in the higher levels. But
exactly.
with K, I mean, he does work very hard. From what little I've been exposed to, the other folks who try to teach this stuff. And I have to also appreciate that, you know, at least for my inclinations in the Zen world. So it's one thing to kind of take step by step by step. And Kay can do that. And he'll just lead you along logically, you know, and come to a conclusion that then you can base on. But he'll also make these outrageous leaps. You know, he'll just like, boom. And that's fairly common in Zen, that you just leap. And I guess I was used to that, and I can do that. And you know,
no
I
problem
would
jumping.
do that with K. And yeah, some people have trouble, and you can't explain it because, you know, if it makes sense.
But my theory is, Tom, people who say they have trouble, there's 2 reasons for it. First reason is because they haven't studied it. They haven't devoted enough time.
Right.
And there's a lot of people I meet who read like 1 page here and 1 paragraph there.
Right.
There was a guy at the gathering 2 weeks ago who said, oh, this stuff just goes over my head. My wife just drags me here. I said, have you tried? Have you read any books? No, I just read this that paragraph. It's not enough. And then, so that's one of the reasons, and they don't give it enough, because I really believe this has to be studied like any other subject.
Yeah.
And it's not that difficult once you give it that level of attention that it deserves. And secondly, as David Bohm was saying, that tape which was shown here, that the ego, the sense of self is so dominant. Because these teachings, these pointers and challenges call for ending of the self, of the psychological self, death of the me, which our conditioning, cultural conditioning, is to sustain it, not kill it, you know. So that's another resistance from a psychological level. But it is not difficult. I don't think it's difficult. Anyway, yes, you seem to agree.
Well, difficult's the wrong word. I mean, is it difficult to raise kids? Of course it is. But is it simple? Of course it is. Just love them, you know?
Right. And also, as Kay pointed out himself, when you call something difficult, it becomes difficult.
Yeah.
So I wrote to our friend who gave that talk here. I said, look, how much motivation would you have if somebody gave you a book and said, nobody understood this, it's difficult, and you either get the whole thing or none of it.
Right.
And he was like, to heck with it, you know? So anyway. You mentioned the indexing project.
Yes.
Did you work with Albion Patterson on that too?
I did. I did work on him, but I didn't work on anywhere near. I mean, he spent his whole life going through, and this is pre-computers, all the books and finding, quote, gems, as he called them, good examples of what Kay meant when he said the word compassion or, you know, freedom or whatever. And I helped him. You know, he was an old man then, and he liked having me around. And
he had this roller thing, you remember?
Yeah.
With the folders. That was his indexing.
So we made a book together. I don't know why we picked the subject of action. But I just would go read through. I remember my wife and I would go camping every weekend at Carpinteria. And, you know, it's a hard thing to put together a book, especially of Kay quotes. And, you know, you have to structure it. You have to read through as much as you can and then see the different types of definitions he gives to the word. And then you have to find good examples of that. And then you read through a passage. And sometimes it'll be just what you're looking for. And I remember like reading that and I'll go, oh, yes. But then sometimes he'll go wander off and, you know, bring in all these other subjects, and you can't have that. But yeah, I did help Albion.
Right. Yeah. And I used to visit him many times on Sundays, and have a chat together, and he was quite a guy.
Yeah.
He used to say, "There's around these circles, Reza, there's too much talk and not enough study."
Yeah.
And this was the time. I mean, this was my impression after Kay died. The foundations started doing these dialogues. Of course, it was also influenced by David Bohm's group, who were, I think, stronger at that point.
Yeah.
I haven't seen them around that much, but they used to also hold dialogues. So this idea of dialogue, which can be wonderful if you've actually gone through these to a certain level.
Yeah.
But otherwise it just becomes chit-chat with no value.
Well, or conflict.
Yeah. Social event.
Yeah, I kind of burned out on dialogues. I used to do them a lot. I love David and Cyril. But, yeah, I mean, the K dialogues that we were doing at a certain point became somewhat sterile.
I think so. And the last one I watched, which on the webcast here, which you did on a weekend, there were like, 6-7 people? Remember in the 90s we used to have like 50, 60 people come, or even more somewhere.
Well, no, I must have read something, and it must have really spoken to me, because it wasn't just Krishnamurti, it was Krishnamurti exclamation point. I was really excited by this guy, and I must have obviously wanted to come back to it and explore more, which maybe I did, but I found this diary years later, and so that's like the first reference I have.
It was the same thing for me, actually, come to think of it, because I had heard the name. The foundation needs to focus more on dissemination in terms of its charter, because the preservation task is more or less finished.
Giving a lot of attention to that. I mean, it won't ever be finished in that you could spend decades curating, quote unquote, the material. But as far as just keeping the originals intact in digital form
Right.
that you can then pass forward to the next generations. Yes, I'd say that we've done a good job there.
Let's talk about that curating. Is any of that being done now?
Well, Wendy, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy Smith is
Mm-hmm.
the archivist, and
Mm-hmm.
if you would ask her, so-and-so letter from this person, that person in the 1930s, and she would say, oh yeah, or else she would know where to look.
Right.
So we've also built a database of all the archive stuff.
Say that again?
We built a database of all the archive
Mhm.
stuff. The goal is, in my mind at least, I don't know whether the foundations or not, is to make all this stuff available free online.
Yeah.
I've never explored it, but I images like the Dead Sea Scrolls, so that, that's fragile stuff, and our stuff is fairly fragile too,
Mm-hmm.
so that somebody can have the experience of going through the Krishnamurti archives
Mm-hmm.
without ever having to come here and touch the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That they can look up what they want, they can see images of the letters, they could listen to the audio or video, and read the transcripts, see whatever. Of course, for many years, material has been a fundraising or a funding source for the foundations. So the notion of giving it away, but I'm of that generation that says,
Yeah.
give it
Free
away and you'll
source.
get much more benefits.
But they're moving that direction anyway. A lot of the text is already available on the
Yes.
jkrishnamurti.org. Why is it chapter by chapter? Is it just?
I
because
don't know. Probably because that was the form we used for K-Text. But yes, it would be nice to have it full books, as we mentioned.
Yeah.
Mary kept a journal of all of her years with Kay, and then the two of them would get together. It's really
I know.
a tribute to him that he would get Mary to sit down,
Mm-hmm.
and she would read a line, an entry from the diary, from the journal, and then they would talk about it, and he would tape record all that. And he might read one line, and they would talk about that for an hour,
Mm-hmm.
and he would have that all transcribed. And so that's, I think, what he's making available.
Yeah.
And in a sense, that's, quote, his material.
It is.
He generated that with Mary.
Right.
And so she was, quote, writing a book, which maybe that would be later, or maybe there's some letters.
Well, she started writing it herself, but she wasn't basically fast enough. That's my impression.
Right, and
then
she was
Scott
probably
said,
tired
Can I
too.
help you?
Yeah.
And then started doing this wonderful work.
Mm.
And now he's got all the tapes. There were lots of tapes.
Right.
He's got everything transcribed,
Mm.
and he's releasing them once a week, I think, or
Mm.
something like this.
Mm.
Instead of, because he said, well, I could publish a book, but the book would be so huge.
Mm.
And should I cut the material to make the book thinner? No.
Mm.
So he found this other way of gradually releasing.
No,
it,
it's
you know.
brilliant, and I think
Yeah.
it's quite a gift.
Yeah, it is. But you were pretty close to Mary Z, from what I remember.
Yes, I loved her very much, and I was happy to help her. Mostly it was like, Tom, I can't make the computer document be saved, and, all this trivial stuff. But
She liked surfing.
she did.
I think so.
Oh, wow.
Because I visited her a few times, and she had some pictures of surfers and stuff, and she told me she always liked surfing. I don't know if she actually. Did
people will
surfing.
study her life, and I think she was quite a
Fascinating.
dynamic woman and had a fascinating life.
So the dissemination is now somewhat of a focus.
Well,
so the
always,
question was,
sure.
and of course, as I told the trustees the other day, I think you were there. I don't know if you left by that time, but at the heart of it, it was just a reminder that the heart of it is living it, because otherwise,
Right.
dissemination is meaningless.
Right.
A flower doesn't. I was writing about this. A flower doesn't have to go out and say, "I smell great." It just smells great, and
Yeah.
this travels itself.
Right.
I'm not saying not travel, but the first step first.
Mm.
Aside from that, the question is how to expose Kay to a greater circle, because
Yes.
he has his life charter, as he said in his early days, was to set the mind of the mankind free,
Right.
or something to that effect. And so I know Amanda is doing these things. I suggested to them,
Yeah.
please be a bit more assertive. Say K's. You don't need to be shy about K.
Mm.
At least what I was thinking, put up a website, thinkonthesethings.com or something like this. So at least they can download the PDF or something like that.
Mm.
But do you have other ideas about how to take
Mm.
K more mainstream, if I could use those words?
Well, this has been the dilemma because, the classic challenge facing any nonprofit organization, especially one of our kind, like a school, they'll have a captive audience, the parents of the kids, and they'll always be there and they'll support
Right.
the school with whatever it needs. And I must say that our parents are great, and we do what we can too. But it's being very well managed by Merity and the staff. So that's one type of nonprofit, and it's another type because we looked into, fundraising help. People offer you help for how to fundraise for your organization, and let's say you were providing meals to the homeless or some other really nice goal. There, people can kind of wrap their minds around that, and they'll say, "All right, well, I'll give you a little money." Or Sierra Club and, save the trees and stuff. But, Krishnamurti Foundation of America or Brockwood or India's a little different story.
But Tom, sorry, let me stop you there,
my
friend. Money. Okay, money is always a subject. Let's forget about money for the moment.
Okay.
Let's assume money wasn't the primary thing.
Okay.
What else can be done in terms of, quote-unquote, taking K mainstream? One thing that comes to my mind,
sure,
I can share with you, and it just came up now as we're having a little dialogue about the subject. If we're talking about putting all the material on the internet, putting the entire archive on the internet, why not put some more focus on this? And because through social networking, there's many ways to get the books out digitally. But what happens with Harper and those guys? What's the scoop there? They own the copyright to some of this material still.
Well, I think we might have preserved the digital rights. Derek's pretty good at that.
I see.
So he might have kept. That might be in the contracts, but you can talk to him about that.
I'm planning to do an interview with Derek actually.
Yeah, he's great.
He is.
Yeah.
Because if that's really the case, then to disseminate digitally is the way to go this day and age, instead of logging air miles.
Well, you also have to realize that people today, and of course it's a generalization, don't really read that much anymore. They like videos. They like to look at stuff. They like moving images dancing before their eyes, and you don't really see people. K is demanding, and you've got to sit there and you grapple with it. And sure, if you're going to med school and you're going to get an MD at the end of it, and you're motivated, you learn all this stuff. But for K, it's like it's really it's for your life, and these are timeless questions, and it takes the same degree, I would say, of focus, concentration, intelligence, probably a whole different order of intelligence to, sustain that exploration. And again, you can only get started with the books, but it's then supposedly lights your fire and you take off on your own.
Exactly. I fully agree with you. I personally have very little patience for text, or less patience for text now than I used to.
Right.
I much prefer to wash my dishes and hear something instead of read it. For example, it just saves me time and so on. And just something unattractive about the format. Text. Nevertheless, Richard Strauss was giving a talk last night. He says he gets every screenplay, every story that he's sent.
Peter. Yes.
you made the same as Peter. And what he said was very interesting. He says, if something is well written, I like to read it.
Right.
And I personally like books of K better than videos almost, because I can take it to bed, I can take it everywhere.
Right.
So, but you're right. I don't think it substitutes also because...
he wasn't a word crafter. Like, he didn't sit down like a lot of authors, because I totally agree with that. If something's written well, it's a pleasure to read. And I love to just read well-written books now. But Kay spoke, and then he transcribed it. And so he really is on the page having a conversation with you.
Exactly.
And your question about dissemination is really the critical one. And I brought up all that stuff about nonprofit organizations because K Foundation have a challenge in that it's like, why should I support this? What's this all about? So...
Well, the trustees need to understand.
Right.
And that the cost is not that much. Once you get the stuff out, digital distribution, if you don't have to worry about copyright.
Right, but I think you have to also realize, and not that I've really looked into marketing and dissemination too much, I've mostly been focused on archives and preserving it properly. But, if you can get where people are at, and I think Amanda Leisure is doing a great job with this Think on These Things thing, because she asks simple questions like, can you imagine a life without fear?
Right.
Or do you and then people say, oh, I don't know. And they start talking about it. Mm-hmm. And then she, of course, weaves in her own understandings of that issue and maybe even little K, but mostly it's just like they can talk about it together. So yes, there definitely are people who, in their own lives, have come to the place where this will be alive for them. I mean, Derek talks about China. It's like this hotbed of interest in Krishnamurti now. It's like one of our, quote, biggest markets. And why is that? Like, what's happening there?
I mean, from a marketer's standpoint, I studied marketing, and one of the things that I studied is that the market is very ripe because the level of confusion and misery in the world is very high.
That's very good.
So the need is there. It's just a matter of tapping into it. I was talking to a girl who went to Oak Grove School, and then she went to Brockwood. I mean, one of the criticism that I have, it's a constructive criticism about Oak Grove, as much as I love them, is that there is no direct anything, or even indirect, with regards to K. There is no K hour or inquiry hour or culture class or nothing like that. So these kids, the seniors, I'm not talking about little kids, don't get the exposure. But anyway, aside from that, once they get exposed to it, then they can go from there. But they need to have the fire needs to be ignited.
Yeah, and supposedly the Buddha's son was one of the hardest people for him to get interested in what he was talking about. So I think this is a timeless problem. If somebody is really interested, it's got to be because it's theirs and they make it their own. And you can provide it in a form that's not going to be an impediment. And I think Kay worked very hard. No flowing robes. He spoke in simple language, and it was logical. It was charged. It was energized. So
genuine. I gave Think on These Things many years ago to a girl who worked at the gym. We were friends. She was a receptionist, always studying in the gym. And I said, "Hey, study this one too." Years later, a couple of weeks ago, I found her on the internet. I called her, remember me? "Oh, Reza, yes." And you know what she wrote to me? She says, "I'm a psychiatrist now, a fellow at some university, and my favorite book is still Think on These Things."
Oh my, yeah. So you spoke also about how can we make K more mainstream. So
I put it in quotes.
Yeah, quotes.
Yeah.
But what you mean by that, if you want to say, how can we reach more people? Because I think there's nobody alive who isn't at some level touched by some of these questions. What's life all about? Is there anything behind life and death? And these timeless religious questions, Yeah. So, you don't want to, quote, water it down and turn it into something that's like a method or a practice or any of that